I've been sitting on the idea for loaded save since maybe 2012. And what we're going to talk about in this video is what the heck is loaded save and why I'm taking a break from it. So, strap in. This is going to be fun. I'm going to try to keep it light and interesting, and we will hopefully learn something about the creative process. And I think that'll be nice. So, here we go. To start off, what has been Loaded Save? Loaded Save was a comic that I have been working on for 20 years, since 2017, since 2018. And I just sort of let the ideas balloon out of proportion to what I realized I may have been capable of, even in the form of a comic. In short, Loaded Save is a comic, was a comic, and I'm going to talk a bit more about what the content of the comic was in this video, as well as why I'm stopping. So first off, the easy stuff. I'm stopping because this comic was too big. It stopped being fun. I kept sitting there drawing the comic and feeling to myself like, wow, can we get to the fun part already? The rest of this video is going to go over a sort of just give you like a bit of a pitch, just give you a sense of the vibe of what Loaded Save was intended to be. I'm going to give you a playlist of music to listen to. I'm going to tell you a bit about the tone of what I was intending. I'm going to tell you about the message of the piece that I was aiming for, talk to you about the setting, some characters, and tell you a little bit about the story, because, well, we'll get into the story stuff later. So right off the bat, there are a couple links in the description of this video. There's a Spotify playlist that you can listen to in the background. I'm not really gonna have that much background music in this because then it is easier to play your own music behind it. So we're just gonna keep it chill. There's a link to a public folder full of some of the documents that I'm going to be showing in this video anyway. And then the third thing is a link to my Patreon page for Bitbutton, but it is my Patreon page. The most recent post there has a link to the extra goodies that came from this whole creative process. So there's a lot of story notes, there's a lot of design notes, and just like overall, like really big picture stuff, as well as all of the Photoshop files and working files for all of the pages of the comic that I worked on. So if you want to see scans, like really like the HD, like the raw scans of my artwork, you could look at that there. I'd be very flattered if you did. Without further ado, this is an overview of Loaded Save, the comic, the multimedia experience as described in broken bits and pieces via talking in a video. So big picture, the tone of Loaded Save was going to be this real gritty, intense, kind of serious, quite serious, sci-fi drama taking place in an electronic world, kind of like Reboot or The Matrix, where all of the characters are computer programs and they're all personified and they have various personalities personified. The aesthetic of it was going to be based a lot on Greek mythology, and like, I don't know, these are some like visual inspirations that I had, where I wanted it to feel very clean, very stark. And the reason I wanted it to be based on a lot of Greek architecture and like really, I don't know, just grandiose architecture was because one of the main centerpieces of Loaded Save is the tournament, which is a giant recycle bin type thing that all of the programs within that universe, within Publica, is where they all live, where they would fight to the death as a means of population control. There are two major groups in Publica. There are the Peacefuls and the Hostiles. And the Hostiles are all forcibly moved into the recycle bin to fight each other to the death. And then there's one remaining at the very end of the tournament, and he becomes the champion, who is also a sort of dictator and runs things in Publica for the next foreseeable future, until the next tournament, if he wins the tournament, or she or they, win the tournament again, then they rule again, and they become like a multiple time winning tournament champion. There was going to be a lot of combat, a lot of throwbacks to animation stuff and like character stuff that I'd done as a kid when I was making the Rock Hard Gladiators, or the Fluid Anims. Yeah, no, those were also RHG. And then I think later on Hyun's Dojo, they became the it would what did they call it? Stick figure battlegrounds. Anyway, the whole seed of the idea for this story came from Mr. Pix. If you've never seen Mr. Pix before, it's fine. He's a stick figure shape-shifting character who is based pretty much on Mr. Fantastic, and he came from a digital world, and his whole thing was he was always absorbing programs. And so I'll pull up what his redesign looked like. So Mr. Pix I redesigned to look like this. Pretty similar, pretty simple as well, but he was going to be, a fighter. These little clip things on his toga were going to come off every time he shapeshifted, and then he would still be taking any shape he wanted, and use that as his way of combating other programs. So that's about it for the tone, really. The major feeling that I wanted it to have is honestly very, very, very similar to a webcomic I love called Vatu, which is by Evan Dom, riceboy.com, rice-boy.com. He's a very, very talented artist, and Vatu is a really unique, really interesting comic. And that's really it. That's all I'll say about tone. The real gist of it is it was gonna be very serious. It was gonna be like, it's pretty heavy stuff. Like if you read all the like story details, like people were gonna die, people were gonna get maimed, lose limbs, become handicapped. They were gonna try to fight each other. There was gonna be some exploration through Mr. Pix's intestines because, well, not really his intestines. It was just like a big empty void inside him where programs would continue to be stored, and eventually they would, fight their way out of that, and there was going to be a character controlling him from inside, a whole bunch of stuff. It's just too much. It's too much. It's out of the scope of this video. This idea of breaking past the binary, or breaking past black and white thinking, black and white structures, black and white distinctions. So the whole story begins with a teacher, her name is Sophia, talking about there are peacefuls and there are hostiles, and she is in this world trying to distinguish and tell people that this is how our world is organized. And there were going to be lots of things like that, and lots of various ways I wanted to play with duality. It was, a bit of a cute thing that I wanted the comic to be in grayscale, because the whole point is to appreciate the shades of gray. I feel like I wanted so badly to have conversations with people about not seeing things in black and white categories and not really forcing things into really rigid frameworks. I wanted to have that conversation more than I wanted to create a comic exploring those ideas. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about black and white thinking. Let's talk about trying to view everything as a spectrum as opposed to everything as an either-or scenario. Maybe we can look at things as a both and scenario, One of my real hopes was that I wouldn't make a comic that felt like it was just talking down to people about ideas I have about the way the world should be, or the way the world is right now, or anything like that, because it was, it's just exhausting. The whole computer system is a binary thing. It runs on zeros and ones. Like that was kind of the fun thing I wanted to play with toward a later bit in the comic, where the old systems of computing were going to run on ones and zeros, binary code, and then there were going to be a future race of programs that were going to be powerful enough to host human consciousness. And the reason they were that powerful is because they ran on quantum computing. And quantum computing, I don't know the science of it very well, but I understood enough of it just to get that like it was the next level of computing. And sort of putting those pieces together of saying like, if we want to get out of a binary system, there will probably be a program who believes in quantum computing and wants to push programs toward quantum computing, and their whole inspiration would be coming from that. So that's enough about the message. Now let's talk about the setting. Let's talk about where this all took place, you know? So the whole story I mentioned before takes place in Publica, which is a small location online where all of the computer programs and files in the world are getting dumped, because we've reached the point where in the future of this comic, we've reached a point where all files in the world are getting grouped into one server, and they all just end up on like a giant web-based systems as opposed to local storage systems. So the whole idea with Publica is the files that get blown into the area by all the recycle bin processes from all of the computers in the world would become the landmass, would become all of the like building material and environmental material. So the programs would be anything living, the sentient creatures are the programs, because the programs are everything that process files. They move stuff around, they build things, they deal with data and all of this other stuff. What's like that one like major thing that stories kind of don't work without? So the first character that was introduced in the comic was Sophia. Sophia is a very, pretty pleasant person, pretty timid, a little bit shy, but generally just wants to do her job. I was toying with this idea of Sophia being a human soul trapped in a program and having forgotten that she was a human soul, being some sort of like test subject for, again, a shadow organization's designs for how we upload consciousness to the internet. I was also going to play with this idea that Sophia would be a bit more easily manipulated to the dark side. Wait, I'll get into the villain a little bit in just a sec. Another character is Jada, who's one of my favorites. Jada is kind of like the opposite side of the coin of Sophia. They're very similar, like in design and build and all this stuff, as well as their like work situation. Jada is also very upset at her work, but in chapter 2, she gets fed up at her job and she quits after having a horrible accident happen to her. She's also labeled as a hostile program, even though she spent a whole bunch of time working in this shitty office environment. But then she gets labeled as hostile, and because she's labeled as hostile by the authorities, she can't go back. She can't go back to her peaceful life. So she ends up in this whole series of events that's going to force her into the tournament to have to fight for her own life and this sort of thing. Oh, and she has a real fiery streak. She has a temper, and that comes into play a little bit later in the story. So Cullen is a bit of a sweetheart. He is a pretty typically peaceful program. He's very, very new to this world, and he comes in, and his whole thing was he was going to help ask the questions that the reader would have. I didn't want to do that so much so that he was just an audience surrogate, and I also really wanted him to have a sense over the course of the story of also gaining more agency. That's kind of a theme. All of these characters really want agency. They all feel severely oppressed by their environment, by Publica, and by the whole arena blood sport system as it takes over their whole lives. There are no jobs in Publica that don't serve the tournament. The next character is Pix, also known as Mr. Pix. He was just going to be called Pix in this story. And, I've had this character a long time. Like, I made up this character when I was a child in 2006 or something like that. So I love him. He's very dear to my heart. But through this story, he was the catalyst for why I even wanted to make this story a reality. I wanted to create a whole adventure revolving around Pix and his whole deal. Like, why does he absorb other people? Why is he a shapeshifter? What does that look like? And then it really started to evolve into this very Jesus-y story. The whole thing that Mr. Pix does is he's programmed to be the savior of Publica. He wants to save all of these programs from the horror that is the tournament. He wants to save them from being deleted. He wants them to live forever. So when I was writing this story, I was sort of coming off of the tale of a very intense time in my life where I was deep into Christian religion and also really struggling with Christian religion because I was discovering that I was a queer young man and I liked boys, and that wasn't something I thought the church was okay with. So when I was first working on outlines of the story, I was like, okay, well, if Pix thinks he's a savior, he thinks he's like Jesus, then he's the villain because I don't like Jesus anymore because it doesn't work for me. That kind of thing. And after working on the story for years and years, or just letting it sit there, letting it percolate, I was like, okay, well, I can still make him a sympathetic kind of villain, if that's what we want to call him, like an antagonist. So his whole thing was he doesn't believe that programs can choose to go quantum. He doesn't believe that programs can be upgraded and transcend the binary stuff. He thinks that all the programs are sort of going to be stuck in the binary system, and so he might as well just save them and take them to another place away from Publica. Now, Phaedra is kind of the flip side of Mr. Pix. She is also a revolutionary. She also really wants to save this environment. She everybody knows that Publica is a shit show, but what she wants to do is lift everybody beyond the binary system and help everybody make it to the fabled quantum reality, so that programs can exist more at peace and they don't exist in this, in this really strict setting. And Phaedra, her whole deal later on in the story was that she is an earlier version or an older version of the program of Jada. And it turns out that they are sort of like mother-daughter. So there was going to be a fun mother-daughter dynamic between the two of them, even though like they're programs. Like programs don't mate with each other and create new programs. You just update the program and then you have a new version. But I just thought it would be something fun to play with. Phaedra would eventually recruit Jada into her whole movement. Phaedra is like this revolutionary leader. But because she has very different ideals than Pix, they butt heads quite a bit. So even though they have the same goal of wanting to save programs from Publica, they start splitting the population on whether or not who's right, who's the person to trust. Phaedra isn't going to absorb you into her gut and take you away to a place that you don't really know exists, while Pix is really strong and he is a much more aggressive fighter in the tournament. Phaedra would also be in the tournament, but her whole thing is nonviolence, and she planned a whole coup around trying to get out of fighting in the tournament because it's just so abhorrent to her. And you did hear me correctly that Pix would be absorbing programs over the course of this story, and as the story continues, he just keeps taking them in by the hundreds, then by the thousands, and eventually there's like a miniature civilization inside Pix who are all his followers and all the people who believe that they are inside this vessel that's going to take them to a promised land, to a promised server, so to speak. Cool. So another character is Tor, I guess. Tor is the name. I don't know if I came up with another name in the writing process, but Tor was going to be the non-binary program whose existence was an affront to the entire society. And, it's not exactly unlike the way society is today toward non-binary and gender non-conforming people. So, yeah. The other character we have here is Brick, and he is sort of a tertiary antagonist because he's the big kahuna. His whole thing is that he's in charge of Publica because he won the tournament last I think I said like the last 7 tournaments in a row. So he's a force to be reckoned with. He just wants to maintain that structure. He really wants everyone to like follow the rules and get real hyped up in those tournaments, even though clearly they're monstrously horrible and millions are dead in that whole process. But like, he just loves it. Like, it served him well, so he's going to uphold it. Then there are these other little characters in the bottom here who would be the sun and the moon kind of things. And one of them would be probably placed at various like entry points to Publica that either programs would have to pass through if they wanted to leave the city, or that they would have to pass through if they were exiled from the city and like sent to this subterranean area. Tor would probably end up there. The non-binary program would end up there. And we would meet some other very interesting aberrations or misfits and what happens when they get rejected from that binary society, and how can they survive? What is good for them in this world? Is there anything? Probably not. The title Loaded Save came from this idea that I had about salvation, about Jesus and Christianity. In my opinion, the idea of salvation, the idea of an afterlife, robs a person of the sense of agency that they have today, right now, to try to create as best conditions they can for themselves and for their fellow people. Loaded Save is a bit of a pun in the sense that it's about computers. You load programs, you save programs on computers. It is also a pun about salvation, and that, in my opinion, the idea of salvation is a loaded idea. I think it might sound appealing at first if you're not really, for whatever reason, it sounds appealing to people. There's a reason accepting Jesus into your heart is an appealing concept for people. But I think it's loaded because I don't know that it creates the best mentality about being present to where your life is right now. And that leads me into my closing statement. If you followed my work in any degree, then you are no stranger to long periods of inactivity and no updates and no posts online. I think a lot of that is a personal quirk of mine that I've come to terms with more as an adult and really want to face head on. I don't know if I can fix it or whatever, but I do want to be realistic about it. Since growing up, I have used art and I have used creativity to avoid responsibilities in life and withdraw into myself and try to just create a little haven for myself. And in a lot of ways, that can be really good. It can be very helpful for decompressing. It's a nice constructive hobby, but it can also create a major disconnect between what is helpful for me to do and what I want to do in the short term. What do I mean by that? Let's say I have a job or I have commitments to other people, and it is helpful for me to honor the commitments I have to other people. But in the short term, I also want to be working on personal projects. I then have this either or scenario in my head sometimes where I will get frustrated at my responsibilities to other people and want to retreat into the work that I have set aside just for myself that I do independently. There is a balance here. I'm not saying that either of those things are 100% great or 100% negative. So, if you made it this far in the video, you will hopefully understand how serious I am about that point. But the real issue comes into play when it's become this ongoing thing of I have my day-to-day life and then I have my projects that I set aside all for myself, and the projects that I set aside grow completely out of control of what I can feasibly accomplish. I mean, there was that Game Feels video that I put on this channel in 2016, and I had chipped away on that video for a year and a half to try to get it done and try to like stick to a vision that I set out. When I was making that, I said to myself, no, I'll never spend this amount of time on a video again, because what was it? Why would I do that? I could have just filmed myself. And lo and behold, I set myself up to try to make a comic that in my head I thought I would work on a lot faster, and in reality I did not work on as fast as I wanted to. And if I had maybe a bit more time or a bit more focus to devote to the project, I would do it. But I've grown quite a bit in the 3 or 4 years that I've worked on the ideas in this comic. So now when I'm drawing them out, it feels kind of disjointed, like I'm drawing the ideas of a person who I feel I've grown out of. I don't know that it's as important to me now to tell the story about all of these computer programs as it was when I was first coming up with the story ideas as a way to cope with working in animation at that time. Like if I kept working on this even full time, it would probably take years. And doing it part-time, a decade, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to me right now. That's why I want to put this out there. I want to sort of put this as a sort of way to just release the story, to just let go of this idea that all of the work that I do for fun has to be by myself, and it has to be this unmanageably long, intense, personal thing that I do that is like my secret opus, as opposed to I can just have hobbies that are fun. I can also work with other people. I can also just draw shorter ideas. I can make fun comics. They don't have to be these very serious be-all, end-all statements about how the binary is destroying the fabric of humanity and sanity. All of this is just to say thank you for being there. If you want to check out Bitbutton, there are some real fun videos that I've been making on there lately with my boyfriend. I also want to make some fun videos on there with other comedians I know in the city. I've been doing improv in the city. While all of this has been happening, I do improv in Vancouver. I made a musical in, well, I didn't make a musical, but like I put together a cabaret in April. I acted in a musical. I've been like just doing other stuff than just comics. It's not like this was the one thing, but a lot of it has taken because I was working on the comic, because I had my precious pictures. I felt like I was cheating myself if I ever spent time drawing things for fun, if I ever spent time on figure studies or drawing environments or just designing characters for fun. I started to feel like all of the hobby time that I had for art, if it's not spent on the comic, then it's a waste of time with my drawing abilities. And how's that for a black and white distinction? Saying that it's a waste of time to draw if it's not on this one big project. And I think...
This is a robbery!
No,
Stab!
You cannot
Stab,
enter.
stab.
I don't know if you have...
Now all I need to see is a completely finished graphic novel.
Oh no!
And if you don't have one, I'll kill ya!
I was wrapping up. I was doing closing thoughts.
And I'm wrapping down. My name is
Nope.
Wonderlick, and I'd like to say hello to the black, to the right, to the red and the yellow, the purple and yellow. Whoops, I messed up. Bang, bang, the boogie to the boogie, say up, jump, the boogie to the bang, bang, boogie. You stop, you don't stop. What the rhythm that'll make your body rock.
It's nice to have fun now and then. And I would like to... The moral of all of this is to have fun with the hobbies that we set aside for ourselves. And right now, I don't really need to spend a ton of time working all by my lonesome. I've done a lot of that.
Sorry. Want to play Link's Awakening?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, I clearly have a lot I need to get to. So take care of yourselves, work on projects that make you happy, and tell your loved ones you love them, you know? This has been David talking about Loaded Save. I appreciate if you got this far in the video. Check out Bitbutton and check out our Patreon, eh? All right. Bye.